Hello, good morning, and welcome to another episode of What Do We Do Now? A conversation about the live event industry. Today, I'm joined by Simon. Say good morning, Simon.
Good morning.
And how are you on this? It's gloomy here. Is it sunny here? Sort of.
No, I've got sun actually. I've got sun.
Nice.
We're lots of rain showers coming and going, but at the moment we've got sun. I'm very well, thank you.
Fabulous. And how are you getting on? How was your weekend under slightly less lockdown conditions?
Yeah, it was. We're beginning to get out and see a few people and do a few more interesting things. Having to be quite creative in ways other than I usually am, just to kind of make use of the time. So I've been inventing a dog ping pong bat, among other things. Our dog wanted to join in, so I've done that, doing a bit of bench restoration and one or two other things around the house, and a bit of work as well.
Very nice.
And the family IT consultant and a homeschooler and a taxi driver and all those other things you have to do.
Very, very multi-skilled. But so tell me, how did you get your start in the live event industry? What's your origin story?
So my origin story is theatre, really. I come from a very musical family, and I always thought I would get involved in something to do with music. But when I was at a sixth form college, I got asked to help out in the little studio theatre we had there by the local theatre company, and I just got hooked literally overnight. I did an all-nighter for them. And at the end of that, I just wanted to do more. So I kind of hung around for the next few days watching the process as this play was produced in the little theatre. And I just loved every minute of it. So I started doing more and more in the theatre there. Then I discovered you could do this for a living. I applied to colleges. I went to Lambda, did the stage management and technical theatre course there. And as part of their course, they do placements. And I was expecting to, go off to a little rep theatre for a few weeks. And instead, I found myself at Imagination. So I was the first of, I think, many placements to Imagination. Got my eyes open to this whole industrial theatre business, which I knew nothing about. At the end of my placement, they kept me on for a few weeks over the holidays to do some more work for them. And then they offered me a job. So I finished the course and then went to work for Imagination.
And how many people were there at Imagination at that point in time?
It was tiny. I think there were about 15, 20 people in the first little office in Maiden Lane at the time. And running these huge projects from this tiny little office. They soon outgrew that office and moved on to Bedford Street. I think there were about 100 people by the time I moved on. But I didn't. I loved the opportunity, and I was doing a whole range of things. I was doing some lighting design. If Andy Bridge was off doing something else, I was doing some kind of technical work, some creative work. There weren't really kind of job descriptions. You just got on with anything that needed doing. But I wanted to be doing the theatre as well. So I kind of went freelance, still based in Imagination, but able to do some lighting design as well. Built up quite a successful career as a lighting designer. Did some West End, some Royal Shakespeare Company, English National Opera. I was Tall and Dean's lighting designer for a couple of world tours. All sorts of interesting things. Yeah. And then when I moved on from Imagination, I started working for other production companies. And I'm not very good at kind of being put in a little box and told this is what you do. I tend to have an opinion about everything.
I found that with lighting designers, actually.
Yeah, some of us do. And, some agencies really like that. They love the fact that you want to be involved in everything. Some don't, So there was a kind of natural selection process where I ended up with, there were two companies that I was doing more and more work for. They were bringing me in earlier and earlier in the process. So I was getting more involved in other kind of creative aspects. And then eventually, one of them, Park Avenue, who I was doing a lot of work for, they actually asked me to lead a project as the creative director. So I I became a creative director sort of by default without really thinking about it, and never looked back. Honestly, just it was a fantastic first opportunity, and ended up with me going there full time, then becoming executive creative director. The beginning of a very exciting period.
Great. And so how was the transition going from being more kind of lighting designer specific, although it sounds like you're always kind of engaged across the whole project, but moving into an actual creative director role?
Well, it had been a gradual process. I guess I had been a creative director in all but name for a while. But then actually having that responsibility just opened loads of opportunity to get involved in all aspects and for it to be what I was supposed to be doing. The hardest thing was not getting drawn into the lighting design on a project that I was creative director. Actually letting that go was tricky because I loved it. It was.
And how did you
never
make that
enough.
work then? Sorry, go on. How did you let go? Like, what was kind of key to making that bit work? Managing others, I suppose. And
yeah, it was. I mean, it was a real conscious decision. I was very lucky that early on in my career, actually at Imagination, I'd learnt that the best way to do any job is to surround yourself by people who are better than you. People. Some people try and kind of control by being the one who knows about everything and then bringing people in just to do, but you're never going to get anywhere that way. No. And I was very lucky to learn that lesson early on in a kind of production role. And so I kind of had to remind myself that there was a temptation when I was creative director to work with a lighting designer who I could oversee and still make sure it was done the way I would have done it. And then I just had to step back from that because I realized, it wasn't working for me, it wasn't working for them. And actually the thing to do was to bring in the best people I knew and get them to do it the way they would do it, the same as I was doing with every other aspect of a show. And as soon as I had that kind of, light bulb moment, it was no longer an issue.
Yeah. Brilliant. And so you kind of built up a network of trusted people, presumably a mixture of kind of freelance and full-timers. It was always a balance, I suppose, with agencies and what they had in-house and kind of what you had to bring in.
Yes, I mean I've had 2 stints as an executive creative director. So the first was at Park Avenue, the second was at Action Impact in Dubai, and in both instances I've had the opportunity to kind of build an in-house team, which is a very, very satisfying process, to kind of spot talent and to have the opportunity to nurture that talent. But yes, at the same time, unless you're one of the very big agencies who have pretty much all the roles in-house, the normal model is that you keep that down to a core and bring in the freelancers or the companies as you need them.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously a lot has changed in the last while now. How are you finding lockdown? Like, what are you finding? When did you realize that things were starting to change for you?
I guess the biggest realization, I've been working on Cybos. Last year it was in London. This year it was due to be in Boston. I was booked to go on a recce trip out there. I was going to meet up with my brother who lives in the States. We're just kind of planning the dates. And then things started to happen, and we kind of thinking, well, is this recce going to go ahead? And it took a while to get cancelled, but the moment that got cancelled, you kind of thought, even then people were talking about, well, we'll do the recce, the next recce in June. And then after a while, you're thinking, no, that probably isn't going to happen. And then the announcement that the event was no longer going to be a live event, due to be in October. I guess it was that project that was the most obvious and kind of personal indication that things were
impactful.
Yeah,
absolutely. And obviously we've been doing a few little bits on virtual stuff recently, but have you been drawn into many others?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think
or the
everybody.
nature of working on those, I suppose, rather than.
Yes, yes. Everybody talks about the learning curve,
Mhm.
and I've learned a lot in the last couple of months about some aspects of the delivery of virtual events that I only knew about,
Mm.
fairly vaguely. I think the thing about being a creative director is that your role is to try and actually do things a bit differently. People get a bit set in their ways, and you want to come along and perhaps just kind of model things up a little bit and come up with some different ways of doing things. So at the moment,
Yeah.
I think because clients are on that steep learning curve, things are going to happen a certain way for a while. But I'm already kind of starting to think about things that I think could be done a bit differently and a bit better if this is going to carry on for some time. But
It's really interesting just to pick up on what you're kind of alluding to there with clients. I think that's what a lot of people are finding as well. There is a lot of experience that's out there, a lot of information about how to put these things together. But I think a lot of our role, I suppose, at the moment is to talk through some of those considerations with clients and start to sort of gently prompt and open their minds about some of the different ways of approaching these things. It's such a core part of what needs to happen. We can't just rush into doing everything differently.
No, but it's also acknowledging that it does have to be different. I think a lot of clients, their first reaction was, and some agencies as well, was to try and simply reproduce a live event in a virtual world. And there's simply no point in doing that. There are practicalities about the nature of a live event that simply aren't designed for a screen. So people who start designing their virtual set with their virtual lectern and virtual projection screen, there's just no point in that. It's not the ideal layout. Once you're watching everything on a screen, you've got the opportunity to come close up to somebody's face. You've got the opportunity to have full screen content. Why give yourself those artificial parameters of a live event if it's no longer a live event? I think you need to step back. I think you need to think about people's attention span, the duration of things. You need to keep them engaged. You need to keep them entertained in different ways. So yes,
someone
you have to
described
think of everything differently.
Yeah, someone sort of once described it as almost a spectrum going from kind of entertainment to infotainment in a way. You kind of mean, so you mustn't forget the entertainment aspect to it, which I think so many people do. So it was good to kind of hear you touching on that again. And I think there are two. There are various reasons for that. I mean, I think people are getting bored of sitting in front of their screen all day. Definitely.
And I think as soon as you're looking at a screen, you're comparing what you're seeing to what you usually see on your screen, like your TV, where you've got all those kind of production values and editing and all those other things that make for a beautiful piece of screen content. So you've got to try and live up to people's expectation of what happens on a screen.
So in terms of, I guess, what you've been learning over the last little while, and are there things that you think will be different or things that will be better as we start to see a little bit more of a return to normal?
I think things are going to change permanently, and I think they're going to change for a number of reasons. A lot of people are talking about hybrid events and assuming that that's the next step. That's the kind of new normal for the next whatever period. I'm personally not convinced about that because I think a lot of these decisions are cost driven. And actually, if you've got a completely remote event, a completely live event, and a hybrid event, the hybrid event's probably the most expensive, because you've got all of the production values of a live event if you've got some audience in the room, and then you've got to bolt on the technology to make that work and make it entertaining for the virtual audience and make sure they're not getting a kind of second-rate experience. So I think in a way it's it's the hardest to do, but also potentially the most expensive for clients who are already struggling with the fact that actually a good remote event is going to cost them quite a lot more money than they were expecting to spend. So these things often end up being driven by cost. So I think that, on the other hand, we've had a very interesting experience recently with a client who has been doing quite a lot of very straightforward virtual events, and has come to us with a proposal for talking to some of their clients, which they do on a quarterly basis, and doing a real kind of high production value virtual event, because they've realized that they can reach far more people this way. So an audience who are now prepared to sit in front of a computer screen for a presentation rather than be flown somewhere. And the fact that you can then reach hundreds or thousands of them in one go rather than a few of them. So for this particular client, I think there's a whole new piece of work there which will come out of this, which will be a series of quarterly events, a decent sized piece of work, and something that they wouldn't have been doing before. So it's opening up new opportunities. Of course, people will want to get back to live events for all the reasons that we all know about. But I think in doing that, the one thing that I haven't heard people talking about much is the environmental impact. So on the one hand, we've all been talking about, the reduced CO2 levels, the fact that planes aren't flying, the oil price dropping because nobody's using the fuel. And we've all been talking about how wonderful this is and how when everything comes back, it has to come back different. But we're all kind of doing that without thinking about what we do. And actually our industry, is not very environmentally friendly. And
horrendously so, in fact. Horrendously so.
So it's really tough to say and really tough to hear, but we need to be thinking about coming back differently. I mean, I love jumping on a plane and going to a country that I haven't been to before and seeing different things and being involved. I love all of that, and a lot of us do. And yes, some agencies and some clients are becoming more aware of this. They're picking up more crew locally. They're thinking about what happens to an exhibition stand after it gets pulled down, that things need to be recycled or donated to charities. Those kind of things are starting to happen. But I think we need to think about this really seriously. I think we need to be prepared for something different. I mean, it's going to be different anyway, because clients have realized that they can do more stuff remotely than they thought they could. So I don't think it'll ever come quite back to where it was. But I think we have to somehow play our part. And I'm not quite sure yet how that is. Whether we need to build kind of buddy systems with other freelancers around the world where we kind of recommend each other and know that, okay, if I'm missing out on this because I'm not going to fly to Australia, I know that actually when they come over here, perhaps I'll get to do that bit instead. And whether that's some kind of formal structure or whether it's just the way it pans out. But I think we need to think that way.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I think the nature of the way that the freelance, or the amount of the industry which is freelance based, and therefore the impact that the nature of that way of working has on that particular aspect. It is really hard to incentivize. It's really hard to measure, just to establish some kind of metric around the sustainability of any particularly given, one given event. But I think that's a brilliant idea. Instead of some kind of buddy system, some way of organizing ourselves better to start to deal with some of this. Because you're right, it's got to change.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a buddy system it could have lots of benefits, because I think we can all learn from each other, and building up that using all this technology to communicate and to share and to kind of learn from each other. And then for the agencies and the clients, you've obviously got reduced flight and accommodation costs. You've probably got a bit more local knowledge. You know, I think there are benefits all round, but I still think it'll be tough because, as I say, you know, everybody's number one instinct at the moment is let's get it back to where it was. You know, I saw somebody on a connection of mine on LinkedIn, you know, celebrating the fact that EasyJet have just announced 500 flights a day from next week, you know, or this week, and it's like, yay, all those planes are going back in the sky, but you know, it does need to be different.
Absolutely. One of the questions I've been finishing on with most people is just to ask, what was the best piece of work advice that you've ever been given? Or do you have some kind of mantra that you live by, or a particular message, I suppose, for the live events industry?
Well, a couple of things. I think I've already touched on one of those things that I just learned for myself very early on, which is surround yourself with the best people. I think the role of a creative director it's a bit like, you know, they say an architect needs to know something about everything and an engineer needs to know everything about one thing. I think as a creative director, you do have to kind of know a bit about everything. You have to have an opinion about everything, but you need to surround yourself with the best possible team, give them the best possible brief, and then let them go for it. So that's something that I kind of learned for myself. I also learned very early on to say yes. You know, if people ask you if you can do something, you say yes, and then you find out how to do it. You know, because that's how, you know, if the opportunity comes along, make the most of the opportunity. And again, that's one that I learned early on. And I think
those both play very well together as well. Because if you're going to say yes, you need to surround yourself with a whole set of talented people in different ways so that you can back up that yes.
Yes, yeah. And actually, these days it's much easier because you've got Google. I have to say, the first time I said yes to something which I didn't know how to do, I had to get on the phone and ring people up. You know, these days it's probably easier to find out how to do stuff. And I think the other thing for any creative directors out there, I have this kind of personal mantra which I call appropriate creativity, and that helps me to focus on what every job needs. I think some people. I used to work in an agency where I was constantly being pushed and said, we need to be more radical. We need radical creativity. And you go, well, what is radical creativity? And one client's radical is another client's, we did that last week, you know. I think finding the appropriate solution to any challenge just kind of encourages you to learn as much as you can about the background, about what's really needed in order to be able to then come up with the most appropriate solution.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. It's been such a really interesting conversation for me. You know, I don't really come from a creative background in any sense of it. I've always been one of those slightly more kind of, I guess, just interested in the nuts and bolts. So it's really interesting to hear your insight and perspective on what's been going on. And we'd love to hear from other people across the industry. So please do get in touch via LinkedIn or Facebook or directly with me if you'd like to take part in one of these. But Simon, thank you very much for now. Say goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.